Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah here. We're holding Mishnah Berurah Chelik Gimel, and Mirz Hashem, today we will be learning Daf Kuf Ayin Gimel Amud Aleph. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Shabbos. We pick up today on Kuf Ayin Beis Amud Beis, 2 lines off the bottom in the Shulchan Aruch, Siman Shin Lamed Aleph Sif Daled. Our learning should be a schus for Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael, Hanusurim Batzaro Bashivya, Ha'imdim Bein Bayam Ubein Bayabasha, Hamakim Yerachem Aleim V'Yitzim Yitzar L'Rvacha Me'afel L'Ora Mishib L'Geula Hashta Bagala V'Zman Kariv V'Neimar Amen. Our learning should be a schus refuah shalema for Yeshua Levi ben Ahuva Malka Chana, for Yitzchak ben Tzion ben Dusha Gila Shifra Basilana Udal Rivka Bashir Leah Chavadasa Baserel. They should all have a refuah shalema B'Seich Shar Chayla Yisrael, and we are mispal that b'schus the limud HaTorah of Klal Yisrael, the Rebbeinu Shalom should protect and watch over every member of Klal Yisrael, b'chol makom shehem. And again, I want to take the opportunity, still before Yom Kippur, to wish everybody a gemar sima tova and a good gebenched yor. Okay, so we pick up at Sif Daled, 2 lines off the bottom. Kuf Ayin Beis Amud Beis, says the Mechaber, Mila Shaloi Bizmana Eina Doiche Shabbos. A bris milah that is not going to take place on the 8th day of the baby's life is not Doiche Shabbos. Explains the Mishnah Berurah, Eina Doiche Shabbos, is cut in Yud Beis, Techiksiv U Bayom Hashmini. U Bayom, when we have the extra word in the pasuk in Parshas Tazriah, U Bayom Hashmini Kai, that is going on day 8. So this is a direct reference to what we learned yesterday. We learned yesterday that the reason bris milah is Doiche Shabbos, we learned it out from the pasuk. The pasuk says U Bayom Hashmini, and on the 8th day Yimoil B'sar or Losai. The Gemara points out that there's no need for the word U Bayom. The pasuk could have just said U Bashmini, and on the 8th, Yimoil B'sar or Losai. Why do we need U Bayom Hashmini? From there, the Gemara learned out that Milah is Doiche Shabbos. U Bayom, that extra word, teaches us it has to be on that day. It has to be on Shabbos. But, says the Mishnah Berurah, that only is true when it's going to be on Yom Shmini. If it's on Yom Shmini, then the drasha kicks in and Milah is Doiche Shabbos. But if it's not going to be on the 8th day of the baby's life, the Milah is not Doiche Shabbos. Moving along to Sif A, bottom line, says the Mechaber. Androgynous, a child who has both male genitalia and female genitalia. V'noilad ben hashmashos, or a baby that's born during the twilight period, during ben hashmashos, and in the Mishnah Berurah we will discuss exactly when ben hashmashos is. V'noilad kishu mohol, or a baby who is born without an arla. You look at him and he looks like he already was circumcised. He already had a bris milah. V'noilad kishu mohol, v'yoytzei doifen, or a baby that was born not naturally but through a C-section. They removed the baby through the side of the mother's body. V'kutis sheyolda, or an Eina Yehudis who gave birth. V'achakach niskaira, and then after the birth she went ahead and she was miskayer. She became a Yehudis. So maybe she saw the miracle of birth and she decided that's it. Obviously there's a Bari Olam and I want to be as close to him as possible and I want to become a Yid. So she had a baby and then she's Niskayer. So now the baby is only 2 days old. So on day 8, are we going to give this baby a bris milah on Shabbos? If it falls out on Shabbos, the Mechaber is going to say no. Umi sheyesh lo shtei arlois, or if you have a baby that has 2 arlois. And we will explain in the Mishnah Berurah exactly what that means. In all of these cases, ein milah on Doiche Shabbos. In all of these cases, the bris milah, if day 8 falls out on Shabbos, the bris milah will not be Doiche Shabbos. And in the Mishnah Berurah, we will see why. Going back to Kuf Ayin Beis Amud Beis, let's see the Mishnah Berurah. Ois Cotton Yud Gimel. Androgynous, what's an androgynous, says the Chavetz Chaim? Hu yeled sheyesh lo zacharus kizachar. This is a baby that has the male genitalia of a male. V'nakvus kinekeva, but also the female genitalia of a woman. And he brings this down from the Rambam Perak Aleph Hilchos Milah. That's an androgynous. That was case number 1. Case number 2 was Ois Cotton Yudalid Noilid Ben Hashmashos, a baby that is born during the Ben Hashmashos period. Explains the Mishnah Berurah that there are 2 cases included over here. Ben Hashmashos to Erev Shabbos. One case would be that the baby is born Friday evening going into Shabbos during the Bein HaShmoshes period. In that case, we now are going to have a suffix. The Bein HaShmoshes period is suffix Yom, suffix Laila. We don't know if the twilight period belongs to the preceding day or it belongs to the next day. So if a baby is born during the Bein HaShmoshes period between Erev Shabbos and Shabbos, it could be that this is an Erev Shabbos baby, in which case day 8 is the following Erev Shabbos, or maybe this baby is a Shabbos baby, and day 8 is the following Shabbos. Now, what do? Could we do that bris milah on the following Shabbos? We can't. If it really was a Shabbos baby, so then yes, the milah would be Doicha Shabbos. But if it was really an Erev Shabbos baby, then now on Shabbos it's not day 8, it's day 9. A bris milah on day 9 is not Doicha Shabbos. Or there's another case, Ubein Bein HaShmoshes to Motzei Shabbos. Or you could have the case where the baby was born during the Bein HaShmoshes period, Motzei Shabbos going into Sunday. Again, we're going to have the same doubt. Is this a Shabbos baby? So then day 8 is the next Shabbos. The bris milah would be Doicha Shabbos. Or is it a Sunday baby? If it's a Sunday baby, then the next Shabbos is day 7, not day 8. There's no such thing as bris milah on day 7. Certainly it's not going to be Doicha Shabbos. So in both cases, says the Chavetz Chaim, ein milas on Doicha Shabbos. In both of these cases, the bris milah will not be Doicha Shabbos. V'nidchel yom rishon, and we're going to postpone the bris milah until Sunday. So if this baby, in the first case, where the baby was born Bein HaShmoshes between Erev Shabbos and Shabbos, we're going to do the bris a week from the next day. We're going to do it a week from Sunday. Right? So if the baby was really a Shabbos baby, no, the bris milah is going to end up being on day 9. If the baby was really an Erev Shabbos baby, the bris is going to end up being on day 10. But there's nothing that we could do about it. What else could we do? We can't do the bris milah on Erev Shabbos. It might be day 7. We can't do the bris milah on Shabbos. Again, maybe it's really only day 7 and it's not Doicha Shabbos. Now, the $62 question says the Mishnah Berurah, Umahu Bein HaShmoshes. How do we define Bein HaShmoshes? When is this Bein HaShmoshes period on the clock? When is this? So this goes back to the famous machlokes that we've already had to discuss several times over the years. The machlokes, most people refer to it as Rabbeinu Tam, and those who agree with Rabbeinu Tam, and the Gra, and those who agree with the Gra. And the Mishnah Berurah gives the short version over here, but I'm going to give it to you first outside, and then you'll understand it easier inside. So, when is Bein HaShmoshes? When is the twilight period? According to the Shita of Rabbeinu Tam, what we call Shkia, when we all talk about Shkia, sunset, is not really Shkia. According to Rabbeinu Tam, that's what's called Tchilas Shkia. That's the beginning of Shkia. And that moment doesn't really define anything halachically, according to Rabbeinu Tam. Now, when is Tzeis HaKechavim, according to Rabbeinu Tam? When is real Tzeis HaKechavim, when it really becomes night and it's really the next day? Rabbeinu Tam says that's Mahalach Yud Beis Mil. That's the famous 72. 72 minutes after what we call Shkia is bona fide night, Tzeis HaKechavim, and that is the beginning of the next day. When does Bein HaShmoshes start? Says Rabbeinu Tam, Bein HaShmoshes starts 13 and a half minutes before Tzeis HaKechavim. So 58 and a half minutes after what we call Shkia, according to Rabbeinu Tam, is the beginning of Bein HaShmoshes. And Bein HaShmoshes lasts for 13 and a half minutes. So when is Bein HaShmoshes, according to Rabbeinu Tam? It's 58 and a half minutes after what we call Shkia is the beginning of Bein HaShmoshes. From then to 72 minutes after Shkia is Bein HaShmoshes. 72 minutes after Shkia is Tzeis HaKechavim. That is the Shita of Rabbeinu Tam. Gra disagrees with this. This all goes back to a famous stira in the Gemara between the Gemara Masechta Shabbos and Gemara Masechta Pesachim. If you look at Shiurim earlier in Chelik Gimel, I went through this in great detail, but the Gra disagrees with this. And according to the Shitas Hagra, which a piece of it just fell out of my mind. Yeah. According to the Shitas Hagra, Bein HaShmoshes begins at what we call Shkia. Sunset. That's the beginning of Bein HaShmoshes. What Rabbeinu Tam calls Tchilas Shkia, what we all call Shkia, according to the Gra, that's the beginning of Bein Hashmashos. When is Tzeis HaKechavim? 13 and a half minutes later. 13 and a half minutes after Shkia is Tzeis HaKechavim, according to the Gra, and that would mark the end of Bein Hashmashos. Most people nowadays do somewhere really in between Rabbeinu Tam and the Gra. I shouldn't say most people. A lot of people follow strict Rabbeinu Tam, using 72 minutes. Rav Moshe and others, and really it's alluded to in the Gra as well, reason that 72 is not a magic number of the Rabbeinu Tam. 72 is when Tzeis HaKechavim was where Rabbeinu Tam, or where in the time of the Gemara, in Bavel and the Mideast and Eretz Yisrael, that's when Tzeis HaKechavim was 72 minutes after what we call Shkia, but it depends where you are on the globe. That's going to depend how quickly you get to Tzeis HaKechavim. Rav Moshe famously said that in the tri-state area, 50 minutes after Shkia is the equivalent of Rabbeinu Tam's 72. So when people hear that Rav Moshe said Tzeis HaKechavim is 50 minutes after Shkia, it's not that he's being choylek on Rabbeinu Tam. No, he's going with Rabbeinu Tam. But he held that in the location on the globe of New York, the immediate area of New York, waiting 50 minutes after Shkia really takes you to Rabbeinu Tam. Practically speaking, we generally assume, kind of like both, we generally assume that Bein Hashmashos begins at what we call Shkia and it ends at Tzeis HaKechavim. When it comes to the question of Halacha L'Maisa, how do you decide if a bris should take place on Shabbos or not? How do you decide whether that baby was born during Bein Hashmashos, or the baby was certainly born on Erev Shabbos, or the baby was certainly born on Shabbos, or was it on Shabbos, or was it on Sunday? The most important thing for people to know is you're in the hospital with your wife, or wherever your wife is when she has that baby. If it's Friday, if it's Shabbos, look at the clock. Note the time of delivery. And then you'll be able to talk to the Moyel. You'll tell the Moyel exactly what time the baby was born on Friday evening or on Motzei Shabbos, and the Moyel will know what to do, and the Moyel will be able to help you decide, depending on which minhagim you follow, he'll be able to decide when does the bris get done. Is the bris a Shabbos bris, a Sunday bris, or a Friday bris? So don't get caught up in the simcha. Remember, look at the clock. Every delivery room has a clock in it. Look at the clock and note the time on the clock. Okay, now let's see it inside. Oiskan Yudalid says the Chavetz Chaim, and Noel Bein Hashmashos. Bein Hashmashos to Erev Shabbos, and Bein Hashmashos to Motzei Shabbos, B'shtei Men Milos and Deicha Shabbos, V'nitchal Yom Rishon. U'mahu Bein Hashmashos. When is this time period of Bein Hashmashos? Yesh Oimrim. And this is brought down in the name of the Magen Avraham, and this is following the Rabbeinu Tam. Yesh Oimrim, there are those that say Dekarov L'Rev Asha, close to 15 minutes. 13 and a half minutes, who shazmanis. And when we're using numbers like 15 minutes, 13 and a half minutes, we're going with proportional hours. Remember, that means that we take the daytime and we divide it into 12 equal parts. And that's how we calculate these times. So Kaidim Li'itzias Shloisha Kechavim Beinanim have a suffix Laila. What did he just say? He just said that approximately 15 minutes before when 3 medium stars come out, aka Tzeis HaKechavim. So close to 15 minutes before Tzeis HaKechavim, close to 15 minutes is 13 and a half minutes, that is the beginning of Bein Hashmashos. So that's Shitas Rabbeinu Tam. Soif Shkia, 13 and a half minutes before Tzeis HaKechavim is the beginning of Bein Hashmashos. U'Revi'ah Shah, if it's 15 minutes before Tzeis HaKechavim, Yotzei Mechlal Suffix. You no longer have a suffix. It's not Bein Hashmashos. If it's Friday evening, and it is 15 minutes before Tzeis HaKechavim, it's a Vadai Erev Shabbos. It's a Vadai Friday. It's a Vadai the preceding day. V'im noiled oz b'Shabbos, v'im noiled oz b'Shabbos, if a baby was born on Shabbos, in other words, Shabbos evening going into Motzei Shabbos, if a baby was born on Shabbos, 15 minutes before Tzeis HaKechavim, Moinen Oisai L'Shabbos Haba will count his 8 days to the following Shabbos, and his bris will be on Shabbos. So again, according to Rabbeinu Tam, if a baby is born on Shabbos evening going into Motzei Shabbos, 15 minutes before Tzeis HaKechavim, that is before Ben Hashmoshes, according to Rabbeinu Tam. So that means it's a Shabbos baby. A Shabbos baby, when's the bris? The following Shabbos. On day 8, it's Teicha Shabbos. Aval, however, this was Shittas Rabbeinu Tam. Kam a poiskim, men I poiskim, machmirin bazeh, they are machmir, usfir lehu, they hold, the me'echen eskasa hachama me'enenu, from what we call shkia, from sunset, the me'echen eskasa hachama me'enenu, from the time that we can no longer see the sun, ad yitzia shloisha kechavim beinanim, until the time of Tzeis HaKechavim, hu hakoil bechlal bein hashmoshes. Many are machmir and say, like I think, probably, I'm afraid to say the word most, but very many people say nowadays, you ask them, when is Bein Hashmoshes? Oh, from Shkia until Tzeis. That's Bein Hashmoshes. V'chein kasav v'birka Yosef, t'nis pashit ken aminig b'chol arei Eretz Yisrael. V'chein kasav b'sefer Zecher L'Avram. Zechar L'Avram. U'b'sefer Seidas Manim. V'afilim safek loyim noilud koydem Bein Hashmoshes, so b'zman Bein Hashmoshes. Even if somehow you have a suffix, I'm not sure if the baby was born during Ben Hashmoshes or the baby was born right before Ben Hashmoshes. Gam kein pasuk haradvaz lahachmir denitchel yarishain. Still, we would postpone the bris until Sunday. Ve'viyu ha'achrayim va'ayin bebir halacha, where he goes into this question in greater detail because this already touches on svek sveka, etc., etc. Okay, so far we had over here the first 2 cases of the Mechaber and Sifhei. The Mechaber said an androgynous, a baby who we can't know, is this really a male or a female? He has the genitalia of both, so we don't know, is this a male, so there's a chiyuv of bris milah, or is this a female, so there's no chiyuv of bris milah? The bris milah cannot be doicha Shabbos. We're not going to be doicha Shabbos, be suffik. The noilid bein hashmoshes, the baby that's born during Ben Hashmoshes, when it comes to following Shabbos, we don't know if we're supposed to do a bris milah today. We don't know if today is day 8, or maybe Friday was day 8 and today is day 9, or maybe today is day 7 and Sunday is day 8. So we can't do a bris milah because we can't be Deicha Shabbos, misafik. The next case is cotton tesvav noilud kishehu mohol, a baby that was born and he appears to already have a bris milah, meaning we don't see an arla. We don't see an arla on this baby. It looks like this baby already is gemalt. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Pirish, Sha'afila b'loi kishui nira mohol. This means that the male organ looks like it's already been circumcised, even when it's not erect. And the point that the Mishnah Berurah is making is, when the aver becomes erect, then the arla, even when the arla is on it, right, the aver extends, so the hood that's formed by the skin of the arla retracts, at least somewhat. So you could have a baby where when the aver is flaccid, when it's soft, you could actually see an arla. When the aver is erect, now it's nira kishu mohol. Now, because the aver extends, so now the hood of the arla retracts back downwards. Now he's nira kemohol. Now he looks like noilid mohol. Says the Mishnah Berurah, that's not called noilid mohol. Noilid mohol is called even when the aver is soft. When you look at it, you don't see an arla. That's noilid mohol. That's nira mohol. Pirish afil beloy kishay nira mohol. Aval kishay nira mohol, rak kishay yiskasha milasa deicha Shabbos. But if you have a baby, when the aver is soft, it's very obvious that there's an arla. It's only when the aver is a niskasha, when it's erect, then it looks like there's no arla. Well, that is not called noilid mohol. But the real noilid mohol, we're not going to do a bris milah on. Now, you'll ask me a question. If the baby is noilid mohol, how could you possibly do a bris milah? If there's noilid mohol, so that means there's no arla to cut off. So how are you doing a bris milah? The answer is that when a baby is noilid mohol, the halacha is that we have to make hatofas dam bris. We have to go make a little cut and release some blood from the mokayim hamila. That's the bris milah that is prescribed for a noilid mohol. But that bris milah is really only being done misafik. What's the suffix? The suffix is when we see a baby that really looks like he's noiled mohol, Chazal tell us we have to worry that there's an arla kivusha, that there's a membrane or a skin of the arla that we really cannot perceive with our eyes. Somehow it became fused to the tip of the aver, and we really can't tell that it's there, but it really is there. And therefore, what halakha prescribes in such a case is hatafas tambris. Now, hatafas tambris is an isser of chayvel on Shabbos, the same way bris milah is. You're making a cut, you're releasing blood. So the question over here is, when you have a baby that's noiled kishu mohol, should you do hatafas tam bris on Shabbos? Is the hatafas tam bris, which is going to be the malach of chayvel, is that doicha Shabbos? And the answer is no, because again, we're only doing it misafik. There's a suffix, maybe there's an arla kavusha. That's why we have to do hatafas tam bris, but we're not going to be doicha Shabbos in the face of a suffix. Okay, moving along, Ice Cotton Tezayin. The next case that the Mechaber discussed was Yoitze Doifen, a baby that was not born naturally but came out through a C-section. Sheniskasha Imay Beleidasa. This is when the mother was experiencing difficulties during childbirth. Vaitziyul Oirech HaBeten, and they extracted the baby from the mother's womb. La Oirech HaBeten, on the side of the woman's torso. Al Yedei Sam, through a medical procedure, otherwise known as a C-section. Ice cotton yodzayin shtei arlois, if you have a baby that has two arlois. What does that mean, that a baby has two arlois? So there's two different ways to understand that. Pirish, one way, and this is two lashonis in Rashi, in the Gemara in Shabbos, and Kuflam and Heyom and Beis. The second lashon of Rashi, I believe it is, Pirish shnei gidin. In the second lashon of Rashi, Rashi says this is a baby that was born with two male organs, two gidin. So, two gidin, two arlos. Okay. Says the Mishnah Berurah, v'yeshayimrim, but Rashi says in another lashon, sheyesh by shtei oiros zal gavzeh. There's only one gid, but there's a double arla. Instead of having one arla that you could cut off, it's doubled over. There's two oiros ha'arla. So you have two arlas to remove. In both of these cases, the milah is not going to be Doicha Shabbos. Why is it the milah going to be Doicha Shabbos? I think we'll explain it more in the next Ice Cotton, says the Mishnah Berurah Cut Yud Ches. In all of these cases, Eid Milah and Doicha Shabbos, the bris milah is not Doicha Shabbos. Says the Chavetz Chaim Tam Kolela, the rationale for all of this is Mishum Suffolk. Now that's not really all, but for the first few cases over here, the reason why the bris milah is not Doicha Shabbos is because we're not going to be Doicha Shabbos be Suffolk. Kigoyin. For example, says the Chavetz Chaim, Gabi androgynous. When we're dealing with an androgynous, Hu Mishum De'ena Zachar Vadai. We don't know that we have a Vadai Zachar over here. Maybe this baby is not really a male, and maybe there's no Chiv Milah. So how can we do a bris milah on Shabbos? Ukamai kain noiled ben hashmashas. So too when it comes to the case of the baby born ben hashmashas, either Friday evening or Motzei Shabbos. Shemahu shaloi bezmana. You want to do a bris milah on Shabbos? Maybe it's really day 7, maybe it's really day 9. So you can't do the bris milah. V'noiled kishu mohol, in the case of the baby who was noiled and he looks like he doesn't have an arla, efshu deleka kain ola kvusha v'hu mol mamish. We said that the problem of the oila kvusha is only a suffix. Maybe there really isn't an arla kvusha. Maybe this baby is truly noiled kishu mol. Maybe there is no arla. And if there is no arla, then there is no bris milah to perform. So then you can't go ahead and make a cut and do the Issa Malach of Chayvel on Shabbos. V'chein, Misha yesh lo shtei arlois. In the case of the baby that appears to have two arlois, the hainu shnei gidin, which we said is either the case that there are two male organs, hunami mishum de'enan yodin eza arla ikris. And the way the Meiri describes this, the Meiri says very simply, the Meiri says if a baby is born with two male organs, the Meiri looks at this and says that means one is the natural one is the one that belongs, the other one is the extra one. Think about it this way. Let's say you have a baby that was born with 6 fingers on one hand. There's an extra finger, right? Nobody looks and says he has 6 fingers. No, he has an extra finger. So the question over here is, which one is the extra one? One of the gidin is the natural gid, and that's the makom where you're mechuyev to do a bris milah. The other one is the extra one. Now, practically speaking, you have no way of deciding which one is the ikr and which one is the tuffle. So when it comes to bris milah, you're going to do a bris milah on both, but you can't do a bris milah on both on Shabbos because they're not both nitain litchai Shabbos. Both of them can't be Doicha Shabbos. Only the real one is Doicha Shabbos. So the Noilid Kishumal via state to Gidden, you can't do a bris milah on Shabbos. Vilas far shnia de mayri b'shtei oiroi ze'al gavzeh, nami tabi de'ein anu yadin kavanus HaTorah bazeh. Let's say, according to the other Lashon of Rashi, that it's not that the baby has two Gidden, but the baby has one Gid with a double Arla. Again, the Torah tells us to remove one Arla. The lashon of the pasuk is ubayom hashmini, on the 8th day, yimoil besar arla soy. You should remove his besar arla, lashon yachid. The Torah commands us to remove one arla. Nowhere in the Torah do we have a commandment to remove two arlas. Now with this baby that has a double arla, you have no choice. You're going to have to remove two. But one of them is nitain litchais as Shabbos. For one of them, we're allowed to be doicha Shabbos, but for the other one, we're not. That one is extra. So how are we doicha Shabbos? So again, in this case, we cannot do a bris milah on Shabbos. So all of these preceding cases, the reason they're not doicha Shabbos is because a suffix bris milah is not going to be doicha Shabbos. Chutz miyoytze doifen ve'ena Yehuda sheyolda. But there are two cases that we had here in Sif. Hey. We had the case of a Yoitze Doifen, a baby that was born through a C-section, and we had the case of an Eino Yehudis who had a baby and was then Niskayer. We said that the bris milos of those babies also are not Doicha Shabbos. Now that has nothing to do with suffix. A baby that's born through a C-section definitely is chayiv in a bris milah on day 8. Well, I should say that. He definitely is chayiv. He's definitely a male child, and he's definitely chayiv in bris milah, and we definitely know where the bris milah has to be done, and we definitely know what we have to cut. So the reason it's not Doicha Shabbos has nothing to do with a suffix. That's not why it's not Doicha Shabbos. So too, the Eino Yehudis that had a baby, that baby is chayiv in bris milah. So why don't we do the bris milah on Shabbos? Explains the Mishnah Berurah. Very interesting. If you look at the pasuk in Parshas Tazria, the pasuk says as follows. The pasuk says, Isha ki Tazria, a woman who will give birth, v'yolad zachar, and she gives birth to a male child, v'tama shivas yamim, she is now tamei for 7 days, kimei nidas devoisa titma. She's tamei for 7 days, the same way a nida is tamei for 7 days, midaraisa. Uvayom hashmini, and on the 8th day, yimol b'sar losai. On the 8th day, you perform a bris milah on the baby. Now, the Torah juxtaposed the halacha that the woman is tamei tumas leda, the tama shivas yamim, with the chiyuv of bris milah bayom hashmini yimol b'sar losai. Oh, that gives rise to a machlokes tanoim. The question is, from the fact that the Torah juxtaposed the din of Tumas Leda with the chiyuv of bris milah, does that mean that they are interdependent? Does that mean that the chiyuv of bris milah is dependent on the din of Tumas Leda? If so, that would come out that the chiyuv to do a bris milah on day 8, the chiyuv of ubayom hashmini yimol b'sar losai, is dependent on whether or not the woman experienced Tumas Leda. Now, a Yoitze Doifen, when a woman has a C-section, she doesn't have a din daraisa of Tumas Leda. She's not susceptible to Tumas Leda if the baby came out through a C-section. So therefore, according to some Tanoim, since she never had Tumas Leda, there's no chiyuv of doing a bris milah on day 8. And if there's no chiyuv daraisa to do the bris milah on day 8, so then it's not Doicha Shabbos, right? Where did we learn that from? Ubayom hashmini. That's where we learn out that bris milah is Doicha Shabbos. So too, the woman who had a baby while she was in Eino Yehudis, she also does not experience Tumas Leda. If she has a baby and then the next day she decides she wants to become a Gioris, she doesn't retroactively get Tumas Leda. So she never had Tumas Leda. Since she wasn't susceptible to Tumas Leda, there are Tanoim that hold that her baby does not have a chiyuv of bris milah on the 8th day, and therefore it can't be doicha Shabbos. Says the Mishnah Berurah. Chutz v'yotze doifen v'eni Yehuda sheyolda hasam atamishum de'ein tameim tumas leida ulakam tanoi according to many tanoim be'inon keseder ha'amar b'parshas Tazria. We have to follow the way the Torah set these psukim up in Parshas Tazria. The Isha kishehi Tameya Leida, when a woman has Tumas Leida, Isha ki Tazria v'yolda zachar v'tama shivas yamim ubayom hashmini yimal b'sar lasai b'na nima l'shmaina. That's when there is a chiyuv of bris milah on day 8, but without Tumas Leida, there is no chiyuv of bris milah on day 8. Okay. Moving along, second line down, Kufayin Gimel Amud Aleph, Sif Vav, says the Mechaber. Machshirei Milah she'efshar la'asoisam me'erev Shabbos. Things that are preparatory to the bris milah, but they are things that could have been done on Erev Shabbos, einam doichem es HaShabbos. They're not doicha Shabbos. So in other words, we learn out from Ubayom Hashmini that bris milah is doicha Shabbos. And we saw in the Mechaber, in the beginning of the Siman, what does it mean that bris milah is doicha Shabbos? You are allowed to perform the bris milah, despite the fact that you're going to be not over, but you're going to perform malacha daraisa on Shabbos. You make the cut of the bris, you're being chayvel. You're being over an issa daraisa of chayvel, told of netilas neshama. You do priya, again, it could be chayvel. You do mitzitza, again, that's chayvel. So you're doing malacha daraisa. Yet, ubayom hashmini, bris milah is doicha Shabbos. But there are also other things that are necessary for a bris milah. For example, to perform a bris milah, you need a knife. Now, let's say the baby is in one house and there is no milah knife, so you can't do a bris milah. Where's the milah knife? The milah knife is a half a mile away through Rishus HaRabim. Well, now, if you want to get a milah knife and you want to do a bris milah, you're going to have to do haitzah midaraisa. You're going to go get the knife, and you're going to transport it through Rishus HaRabim. You're going to take it from Rishus HaYachid to Rishus HaRabim, from Rishus HaRabim to Rishus HaYachid. You're going to transport a Dalet Amos in Rishus HaRabim. You're going to perform haitzah daraisa. So, do we turn around and say, bris milah is doicha Shabbos? You need a knife, go get a knife. How about making a knife? Making a keli, tikkun moneh. Are we going to turn around and say, oh, yeah, bris milah is doicha Shabbos? You want to go make a knife? Maybe make a fire for the blacksmith and fire up the furnace and go make a keli? Is everything just now doicha Shabbos because bris milah is doicha Shabbos? Says the Mechaber, no. Machshirei milah, things that are preparatory for the milah. It's not the milah itself. It's not cutting the arla. It's not doing the priya. It's not even putting a bandage on the wound. These are steps that are preparatory to the milah. Machshirei milah. She'efshar la'asoisam me'erev Shabbos. And there are things that could have been done on Erev Shabbos. Why didn't you bring the knife to the house on Erev Shabbos? You needed a knife. Bring the knife to the house on Erev Shabbos. You need hot water for the baby, for the bris. Heat up water on Erev Shabbos. So things that are preparatory for the milah, but they could have been performed on Erev Shabbos, einam doichem es HaShabbos. They are not doicha Shabbos. And if you don't have them, you're going to end up pushing off the bris milah. Says the Mechaber Lefikach, therefore, flowing from that halacha. Im lo yehevi izemel lemila me Erev Shabbos. If you didn't bring a knife to perform the bris milah on Erev Shabbos, and you would have to bring the knife through a Rishus HaRabim, or even through a Rishus D'Rabbanan, even if you have to carry it through a Carmelis, or even if you have to carry it from a Chatzar She'eina Me'ureves, which is only an Issa D'Rabbanan. But, im lo yehevi izemel lemila me Erev Shabbos, if you didn't bring a knife on Erev Shabbos, lo yeviyenu b'Shabbos. You're not allowed to bring it on Shabbos. So now you don't have a knife. And now you're not going to do bris milah on day 8. You're going to postpone it to Sunday. And you're not going to do a bris bismanoi. Even though milah is doicha Shabbos, but the machshirei milah that you could have done on Erev Shabbos, those are not doicha Shabbos. So now you're not going to do a bris bismanoi. This is true even if it's only going to be an issa d'Rabbanan to go get the knife. So like I said, maybe there's no real Rishus HaRabim. Maybe you're only going to take the knife through a carmelis, which is an Issa D'Rabbanan. Get ready for Chelik Dalet. Or maybe it's a chotzer situation, and you're only going to transport the knife from a chotzer she'ena mu'ureves. Really, it's a Rishus HaYochid, but there's no Iruve Chatzeris. So to transport the knife is only an Issa D'Rabbanan. Doesn't matter. It's still not Doiche Shabbos, and you're going to postpone the bris. Why, says the Mechaber? Shehe'emidu chachamim divreim b'makom kares. Because the chachamim enforce their dinei d'Rabbanan even in the face of Mila, which is so chamor that it involves kares. What does that mean? There's no kares in what we're talking about over here, but we know that if somebody goes through life and he never gets himself a bris milah, he's going to be liable to kares. So bris milah is so chamor that it involves an issa kares. Still in all, we're going to be madched the bris milah. We're going to postpone it till Sunday in the face of an issa d'Rabbanan. We're not going to allow you to transport a sakin through a chasser she'ena mu'reves, which is an issa d'Rabbanan, in order to allow you to perform a bris milah bismanoi. Nope, we're going to push off the bris. Okay, let's take a look here at some Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah cut yutes izemel or le'inyan tiltel ha'izemel achar hamila. Once we're talking about the knife, the Mishnah Berurah points out another famous shaila when it comes to the knife of the bris milah. When there's a milah bismana on Shabbos, and it is Doiche Shabbos, so the moil goes, he takes the milah knife, and he does a bris milah. Now what do you do with the knife? The knife is really muktzah. Why? It's muktzah machmas chesar and kiss. A milah knife is a specialized tool. Nobody uses it to cut an apple. So it's why? Because he would be afraid he'll ruin it. So the keli, the knife of a bris milah, is muktzah machmas chesar and kiss. Now that you did the bris milah, what do you do with the knife? So says the Mishnah Berurah, take a look back. El b'siman shen yud sifkat and tesvav b'Mishnah Berurah mash kasav dusham. And to just give you a reminder, we said over there that preferably the moil should not put down the knife. He should take the knife, and once he's holding it, the halach is when you're holding muktzah in your hand, you're allowed to take it and put it wherever you need to put it. So he should just hold the knife and put it away somewhere in the room where he is. He should put it in a safe place. Problem is that the moil usually has to do priya. So he has to put down the knife because he has to do priya. So the two eitzes that the Mishnah Berurah brought down is either the moil should hand the knife to somebody else, and that person should go put it away in a safe place, or what was his other eitzah? Or we said that even though he put it down for the priya, he's allowed to pick it back up and put it somewhere safe. But ayin sham for greater detail. Okay. So far over here in Sivav, we learned that machshirei milah she'efshar la'asoisa me'erev Shabbos are not doiche Shabbos. Not only are they not doiche Shabbos on a daraisa level, that you're not allowed to perform malacha daraisa for machshirei milah she'efshar la'asoisa me'erev Shabbos, they're not even doiche yisurei d'Rabbanan. So you need a knife to do the bris milah, and it would only be an issa d'Rabbanan for you to transport the knife. You're not allowed to transport the knife. Because machshirei milah she'efshar la'asoisa me'erev Shabbos are not doiche Shabbos, even on a d'Rabbanan level. So, continues the Mechaber, 4 lines down, and he says, V'loimar le'ena Yehudi la'asoisam. How about Amira la'akum? How about if you want to ask an Eina Yehudi? We need the knife. Go get the knife. So, says the Mechaber, it depends, and the math is very simple here. The Mechaber says, Imhu davar shemaso Yisrael ein ba Yisrael elam d'Rabbanan. What are you asking the Eina Yehudi to do? If you're asking the Eina Yehudi to do a d'Rabbanan, so for example, you need the knife, and the knife is in the chotzer, and it's a chotzer she'ena mu'ureves. So then for Yisrael to go get the knife would only be an issa d'Rabbanan. Now he's asking an Eina Yehudi to do it. Well, in that case, it's a double d'Rabbanan. It's a shvus to shvus, and it's a shvus to shvus b'makom mitzvah. So says the Mechaber, Omer le'Eina Yehudi v'Iseu. So yes, you could do Amir la'akum on an issa d'Rabbanan for machshirei milah she'efshar la'asoisa me'erev Shabbos, because it's a shvus to shvus b'makom mitzvah. So that's okay. Ve'emu davar she'asur liYisrael la'asoisa min HaTorah. But you want to ask the Eina Yehudi to do something that would be usher for you to do midaraisa. You want to ask him to go bring a knife through Rishus Harabim. That would be an issa daraisa. Lo yomer le'Eina Yehudi la'asoisa. You're not allowed to do a miralakim on that because that would be a single d'Rabbanan. And we just said, Machshirei Mila she'efshar la'asoisa me'erev Shabbos are not doiche even Isurei d'Rabbanan. So you can't do a miralakim on a daraisa because a miralakim on a daraisa is a single d'Rabbanan. V'ayin la'el siman shin zayin. Says the Mishnah Berurah. Ois kat nechaf. Omer la'ena Yehudi va'oisehu. If what you're asking the Eini Yehudi to do is only an Issa d'Rabbanan, you could do a miralakim. Why? Nevertheless, the Mishnah Berurah says, don't just take this as a blanket heter. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Aser lahavi atinoik lebeis hakneses derech chotzer she'ena me'ureves afilu al yedei eina Yehudi. Okay, let's imagine this. You're dealing with a bungalow colony. You'll see in Chelik Daled Mirtz Hashem, when I talk about chatzerim, I always like to use the example of bungalow colonies because I think that's something that everybody could visualize. You have a bungalow colony that's surrounded by a fence. Really, the bungalow colony is a Rishus HaYachid, right? So really, you should be allowed to carry from every bungalow out to the chutzner, to the courtyard in the middle, from the chutzner to the bungalows, from one bungalow to another bungalow, through the chutzner. Everything should be mutter, because it's all Rishos HaYachids. Yet, midrabanan, it's aser, unless you make it a Ruvei Chatzeris. So, let's say we're dealing with a bris milah situation, and you have the bungalow colony. The baby is in unit number 22. Now, you want to take the baby from unit number 22 to the shul. The shul is also in the bungalow colony. It's also in the chutzner. Now, the problem is that nobody made any Ruvei Chatzeris. So since nobody made any Ruvei Chatzeris, carrying in this bungalow colony is aser, because there's no Ruvei Chatzeris. But it's an Issa d'Rabbanan. So now what you want to do is, you want to ask an Eina Yehudi. There's the maintenance man, the Goyish maintenance man of the bungalow colony, Eina Yehudi. You want to ask him to transport the baby from unit 21 over to the shul, which is only an Issa d'Rabbanan. Now, it sounded like from the Mechaber over here that should be mutter, right? Because it's a shvus to shvus. You're doing a mira la'akum on an Issa d'Rabbanan of carrying through a chatzah she'eina me'ureves to do the bris milah. So l'chayr it should be mutter, right? Says the Mishnah Berurah, no. Umikam makom also lahavi atinik lebeis hakneses derech chatzah she'eina me'ureves afilu al yedei eina Yehudi. You're not allowed to ask any Yehudi to do this. Why? Because don't do the bris milah in the shul. Do the bris milah in unit 21. This is not a blanket heter. It's not a hefkervelt. That yes, you could just do a shvus to shvus b'makom mitzvah. No, only if it's necessary. Over here, it's not necessary. Do the bris milah in unit 21. That's all. Don't transport the baby. V'harbe pamim malan babayis kishiyesh tzina. Says the Mishnah Berurah, what? You never heard of a bris that takes place in a house? Apparently in Radin, this is something that was common. It was cold outside. They couldn't take the baby outside. So they did the milah in the house. So even though there is an inyan to do a milah in a shul, it's brought down in a Rashba. The Rashba says, Lifnei Hashem. He makes a limud. It's from a pasuk, Vayichrusu Shneim Bris Lifnei Hashem. So the Rashba does mention there is an inyan to do a bris in a Beis HaKnesses, but not to be over Yisuri D'Rabbanan, even a shus b'makom mitzvah. Now, here the Chavetz Chaim says again, when you're faced with these kind of shilas, you always have to do the math. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Kishetzarik loitzi atinik mi beisa lechatzah she'einu me'ureves ela izem el hamunach sham. Let's say you have a case like this. Let's say the baby is in unit 21, but the sakin, the izemel, the knife, is in unit 15. And again, there's no Ruvei Chatzeris. Now, you can't do the bris in unit 21 because you don't have the knife. Okay, so what do you do now? So somebody might jump up and say, okay, now there's no problem. Take the baby from unit 21, bring him to unit 15. Why not? It's not like the case that we had before. Now you have no brera. You can't do the bris without the knife. You need the knife, right? So, okay, so you're asking an Eina Yehudi to do an Issa D'Rabbanan, shvus to shvus b'makom mitzvah, ask Tony to take the baby from unit 21, bring him to unit 15 to do the bris. Says the Mishnah Berurah, no, don't do that. Instead, ask Tony to bring the knife from unit 15 to unit 21. You know why? Because think it through. Ezu chacham Haroyas anoilid. A wise person sees the future. If you ask Tony to take the baby from unit 21 to unit 15 and do the bris, what's going to happen after the bris? You're going to ask him to take the baby from unit 15 and bring him back to unit 21 to mommy so mommy can nurse him and take care of him for the rest of Shabbos. But if you bring the knife from unit 15 to unit 21, you're only going to have to ask the Ani Yehudi to do an Issa D'Rabbanan once. You'll ask him, bring the knife from 15 to 21, and then you'll leave the knife at 21. So says the Mishnah Berurah, be smart. Perform one time Shvus to Shvus b'Makom Mitzvah, not twice. Let's see it inside. Ukeshetzark lo'itziatinik mibeis elachotze she'enim ureves elu izem alamunat sham. Mutter al yedei and Yehudi, you can ask an Ani Yehudi to do this. Kevan deleka rishos harabim, because you're not dealing with an Issa D'Oraisa. It's only an Issa D'Rabbanan. Umikam makom, however, toiv yoser lahavi yizemel al yedei Ani Yehudi latinoik. Bring the knife to the baby. Because if you bring the baby to the knife, you're going to end up doing shvus to shvus b'Makom Mitzvah a second time when you want to bring the baby back to his house. He brings this down from Machzah Shekel. Okay, let's go weiter here in the Mechaber. No, we did the Mechaber. Now we go along to Oiskar Chaf Aleph. Loy Yoimar. If you want to ask the Ani Yehudi to do something that would be an Issa D'Oraisa, you're not allowed to do that, because that's a single D'Rabbanan of Amir Lakum. And we said Machshirei Mitzvah She'efshar L'Asaisa B'Erev Shabbos are not Doiche Shabbos, even on the level of a D'Rabbanan. So you can't do Amir Lakum on a D'Oraisa. Oiskar Chaf Aleph Lo Yoimar. The Gam Amir L'Ani Yehudi B'Davar Sh'Asar Ben HaTorah Hevi Kashash Shvus. Amir Lakum on a D'Oraisa is an Issa D'Rabbanan. V'Hemidu Chachabim Devreim. And we said the Chazal enforced their Isuri D'Rabbanan even in the presence of the Chiyuv of Bris Milah. That's the way the Mechaber closed out the Sif. The Mishnah Berurah says this is talking about Sif Hey B'Hagah. It's not the Mechaber closed it out, it was the Ramah. The Ramah said in the parentheses, Ayin Le'el Siman Shin Zayin Sif Hey, says the Mishnah Berurah, that's the famous Ramah. The Sham Hevi Ramah, over there the Ramah brings down a Shita, the Yesh Makilin, there are those that are Mekel Afilu B'Malacha D'Oraisa Loy Meleini Yehudi B'Makom Mitzvah. We saw back there in Shidhei a Shita that holds that you're allowed to do Amir La'akum on a D'Oraisa B'Makom Mitzvah, a single Shvus. Not Amir La'akum on a D'Rabbanan, Amir La'akum on a D'Oraisa. V'after Rov Poskim Cholkom Asfarazu. Most poskim disagree with that shita. V'ikar kidivreim, and we paskin like that. U'kamasha kasav simin reishayin v'asiv beis. Mekamakan in mila hamekel v'saybach al divreim lo yifsid. Somebody who's mekel to do a bris milah bismanoi by doing amira la'akam on a D'Oraisa, relying on that shita that amira la'akam on a D'Oraisa is mutter b'Makom Mitzvah lo yifsid im efshar b'inyan acher. There's no other way to get the bris milah done. No, you don't lose out if you're Samech on that Shita. Certainly when it comes to the Yisurim of transporting through from one Rishus to another Rishus, the Laharbe Paiskim Rishus Harabim, many Paiskim hold that our streets are not real Rishus Harabims, and therefore it's another reason to be Mekel, Va'ayin Bebiur Halacha. Okay, I thought we would get through Siv Zayin, which is a little bit of a complicated sif, but I see it's not to be. Okay, B'Ritz Hashem, we're not going to fall behind. Okay, thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah, discussing limud HaTorah should be making against Klal Yisrael. The Rebbe Hashem should send Yeshua's for force, Parnaset Sheduchim to all those in need. We should be zeicher to see the Bias Gael Tzedek, B'Meher V'Yameinu, Amen. Be well.